Welcome to Booking It. Today's episode will be The Road. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Booking It. I'm of course your eloquent host, Cooper Cobbs, and joining me today is a very good college friend of mine, Mr. Isaiah Kasowski. Thanks for coming on, Isaiah.
Thank you, Cooper. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Isaiah and I quickly hit it off, of course, and we started talking, and eventually we started talking about books and things. We enjoy kind of the same podcasts and books. And we started talking about The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And we
Mhm.
decided that, hey, we should definitely do a podcast about that. So here we are, a couple months later. Definitely my fault for it being that much later. But thanks for coming on, Isaiah, to talk about The Road. I'm super excited about this.
Absolutely. This is going to be great.
Yeah, so real quick before we dive in, just a heads up that The Road is a bit like more darker and more violent than probably a normal book that we'd read on the podcast. I don't think that it's gratuitous. I don't think it's, I don't know, all that, awful or anything like that. But it is definitely a book that should be avoided for younger readers, and should just, use discretion when it comes to choosing what to read and things like that. But our conversation today will hopefully be helpful for those of you who haven't read it for a little bit, and we'll dive into spoilers too, and talk about kind of the deeper things as well. So I think there is a lot of stuff that to get out of this book anyway, and so hope that people who read it find the same things that we did. But first, Isaiah, we normally do this on the podcast, but tell us about like your history with the road, like where when did you first experience it, your kind of first impressions
Yeah.
and thoughts, and to where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I first heard about The Road when my dad talked about it, and it was a book that he actually couldn't finish. So I was like, that's a book I want to try to read.
Why was that?
I think he wasn't into the gravity of it. It was probably a little
Sure. And
little too
dude, I
much
bet
for his
this book
taste.
hits different as a parent. Like I
Yeah.
really do think.
Oh, that is so true. So like no shame there. I just felt like I was probably like 16 or 17, so I wanted to like
Hmm.
be a man in
Yeah.
a bookish sense and read a tough book. Reading it first time, I actually couldn't get through it, for similar like reasons. And then, but like I did end up, I think like 6 months later finishing it because I just like remembered that it was a book that hit hard, and that's one thing I really like about books in general. I like books that hit hard. So
Hmm.
I did end up finishing it. Well worth it, and glad to be talking about it. Yeah. What's your story with the road?
I think maybe it was through Andrew Peterson's Adoring the Dark, honestly. He writes a song about kind of the metaphor carry the fire at some point. He wrote a song
Mhm.
about that. And so he talks about that a bit in Adorning the Dark, are you familiar with that, Isaiah?
Yes, yes, I've
Yeah,
read Adventure Dark. Great book.
I agree. And it's in some part he's talking about that song he mentions on the road and things like that. And that was kind of like my first thing. And I think all he says about it is that it's good and it's dark and it's got this metaphor. That's all I remembered about it. And then I don't know. You see, I saw this cover like in bookstores and things like that, at Barnes and Noble and things. And then as I don't know, started a podcast and started thinking about more about books and literature, I heard McCarthy's name come up more. I heard The Road come up more and things like that. And so it just kind of I don't remember any more like moments, but it kind of like grew in my subconsciousness. And then I decided to I had this thing for a few years where I bought a book for my dad every summer, and then he wouldn't read it, and like a year later, I would buy him a new one and claim the old one for my bookshelf. So like I have
Mhm.
a Tale of Two Cities on my bookshelf, like one of those penguin cloth bound I ever bought from him. So actually, I still have the receipt somewhere. But
I
in
love that.
2023, I bought this book for my dad, and he never read it, but I just kind of claimed it for myself, and decided that I was going to dive into McCarthy. And people like seem to think that The Road is pretty accessible for McCarthy. Like it's on the shorter side. It's not like that wordy compared to other books of his.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I dived in like February or something like that and just read it through. And I was reading along with the podcast close reads, which I enjoyed too. So that was kind of my first time reading it, and I overall I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was pretty good. So I don't know. I guess if we can get to that, like, do you are you? I mean, I think both of us agree that it's pretty good. But like, where would you rate it on like how good it is? Would you say it's a instant classic? Would you say that it's a fun literary read, or how would you gauge your overall thoughts on the book?
I wouldn't use the word fun. It's
Yeah, maybe that was
very
that's a good point.
it's very deep, and like I said, hits hard.
Yeah.
So I would put it in. at least for my personal taste, like a classics type category.
Hmm.
Um, it just kind of has that resonance and is very unique, which I think a lot of classical books are. Yeah.
Yeah,
But definitely recommend it. Yeah. What do you think?
yeah, I agree. I think you're right. It hits hard, and I was as I was kind of going through it again today. I was talking to mom about just like the opening paragraph, and just like the weight and the illusions, the I don't know, the biblical primordialness of it sometimes. Um, it really hits hard too. Like it's very simple. It's about a book about, a father and a son. It could even seem like it's got this, apocalyptic kind of into the world background to it, which can seem pulpy, but it's not in any way
Right.
pulpy. And
Totally.
then it's got like these references to the ancient, to the time before. You brought up a lot of good quotes about like the beauty and goodness of the previous world that seems to be lost now. And so it's just got all this like aura around it that is incredible. And like you said, then there's the story of like survival and starvation and the horror of the world that hits hard as well. I think it's spectacular. I really enjoyed it. Um, so I've read a few books by McCarthy now, and I think that this is one of it's one of the simplest of his stories for sure. But I think it's still one of my
Yes.
favorites of his for sure. So I don't have you read any more of his or
I read No Country for Old Men.
okay.
I agree. This one's simpler. One thing I think, have you read No Country for Old Men?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that one has a more clear plot, which I think is one thing that isn't as clear in the road, but
Yeah,
I
there's
think,
no like direction per se.
yeah, yeah, but stick with it because
Yeah,
I think the ending's well worth it. But going a little further with the how he like narrows it down, he takes away the like excesses. There's like little to no punctuation. The
yeah,
father and son are unnamed, and I think it really just like hones in on that father son relationship because it's not focusing on like the kind of excess stuff. It doesn't tell us how the
yeah.
world got here,
Right.
but
Right. Yeah, that is one thing where I've read a few books like that I guess tend to be more, in the literary side of things. They're not like focused mostly on like the plot of how the mechanics, things like that. Actually, I don't know why this comparison popped to my mind, but like A Quiet Place is kind of like that too, you know, where like
yeah,
you don't really know where these monsters came from or anything like that, but it's kind of the story about this family and their survival. I think you're absolutely right. Like he cuts off all the extraneous, like what is this cataclysm? We get some hints that it might have been, fiery or some kind of natural disaster or even nuclear. I guess I don't know if you have a theory on if it's like man caused or natural or if, one caused the other.
I can't remember if there were any hints. I feel like there were, but I think ultimately it wasn't like it's not what
Yeah.
the book's about. But
Right, correct. Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I like that.
interesting, interesting stuff.
So with the punctuation you mentioned, like did that bother you at first? Like also, were you aware of that when you came in or
No, I kind of so I started reading, and I think it probably first hit when like they started talking, and
yeah.
I had to like realize, oh, they're talking
Yeah.
because there's no quotation marks. But I think I honestly think it like painted a better picture of the world, which itself isn't a good picture because it's a very dark
Right.
picture, but I think it
Right.
was a very good artistic tool.
Yeah, I know that you and I both like the Stories of Soul Food podcast. I think we've joked
Yes,
about
yes.
that. Andy Wilson's critique of this is just like he seems to be like for no reason just trying to distract you, but because he's so good he can do it anyway. That kind of thing. He compared it to like a
Yes.
great orator like giving a speech with his
Yes.
pants down or something like that. Like I am so good I'll do it with my pants down. And he said that's like Cormac McCarthy, where he's a good author. He like sentence over sentence, fantastic, and then it's just like let me not use commas, let me not use quotation marks. And you're like, why? I personally kind of like the and if that makes sense. Like here, I'll give an example. Um, he pushed away the plastic tarpaulin and raised himself in the stinking robes and blankets and looked toward the east for any light, but there was none. And so there's no commas, but it's just like,
Yeah.
and. I like that. I mean, I think that can uh, turn into some good writing, but I think you're right. I think that at first I was like, oh yeah, there's nothing like this. I think I'd heard that going in though, so I was a little prepared. But I didn't mind it after a while. There aren't that many characters, so it's not that hard to keep track of dialogue per
Right,
se.
right.
I don't know if maybe in some of his other books it gets harder, but he's pretty good at dialogue, and so the voices are kind of easy to pick up on. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree.
Okay, let's talk about characters then. You mentioned the father and the son. They kind of they go unnamed, and
Yes.
I've read places, and that's true. But like get just kind of a service reading that they're kind of meant to be, everyman or archetypal.
Hmm.
They stand in for everyone, representatives. What do you make of that? Like, what do they represent? How does that like further the connection between the reader and the characters if they in a different way than if they had been named?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, like you said, they stand in for like us in the sense that when we read the book, at least maybe this is just how I thought it, but I'm like putting myself in their positions
Yeah.
and like what would I do if, I was in the father's position and son's position, etc. But I think it also just it's more like honing in on like their actions, their like who they are as like a character. I think of like the son's like innocence,
Hmm.
his conscience. This kind of came up with the conversation with Ellie, which we'll probably get to.
Yeah.
Um, and the father's like defense of the son, which is
Yeah.
really cool. It's not exactly the dealing with their names, but yeah,
No, I like that a lot. I think you said you could even finish the novel your first time, and your dad couldn't finish it either
yeah.
because it's just kind of like that weighty, like you said. What
Hmm.
about the characters attract you to be so invested in them to where you're like so scared to finish what's gonna happen? Because I know multiple people the same way, or I've heard of other people who, maybe they are a parent, so it just hits differently, but they just don't want to find out what happens to the kid because they're just
Yeah.
so afraid that something is going to destroy the innocence of that kid. What about it for you though got you so invested in the characters?
Actually, I think what brought me back to the book was that I did hear that it was going to be redemptive at the end,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
also, and like you said, Andrew Peterson talking about it in Adorning the Dark, he also has a song, Carry the Fire, which is based on a phrase from the book.
Yeah.
And when I'd read it like the first time, pause, listened to the song, and just kind of thought about it more. And like, I think what was really inspiring to me to finish it was the grit,
Mm.
because I think that's one of the aspects of what the carrying the fire is, where they just got to keep going, and the world is just like terrible, but they're carrying the fire, so they gotta go forward.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really inspiring for me.
I think that's totally true. And I would echo that to people who maybe haven't read the book yet or started it and didn't finish it. That I think
Mm,
you're absolutely right. Like it is, I think it's worth finishing. I think you're right. I think there is hope and it's redemptive. And
absolutely.
and so if you're afraid of what might happen, I wouldn't be too much. Like I think that at least not so much that you shouldn't read the book, if that makes sense. Because obviously like, the tension is part of the story and it's
Right.
very compelling. Even as I was like looking through it today, I wasn't like meaning to like read the whole thing again, but I read huge chunks of it again because I was just like,
Yeah.
with a couple scenes in there, like so it can be so gripping. But I think it's really redemptive. I like your point about the grit and things like that. Well, you mentioned Carry the Fire. Let's talk about that.
Yes.
It's like the big metaphor of the book, um, carry the fire, and then it also is kind of connected as well to the theme of the good guys versus the bad guys. I guess what does carry the fire mean to you? Like when you read the book, when you thought about it in context with the song you listened to as well. I don't know. Like what was your reading of it?
Yes. I like I said, I think it carrying the fire for me means being a light to the world and just living like passionately because the father and the son could like at any moment like give up and frankly kill themselves, and which is actually a theme that not to sound too dark here obviously, but it comes up explicitly in the book where
Yeah,
the father um tells the son, if you don't know where I am, he shows him how to use the pistol
right.
to kill himself. And I think carrying the fire means um going forward in light that that is one option, but seeing the glimmer of hope in the future, which I think kind of is represented by the ocean, which
Yeah.
they're kind of going towards. So yeah, I think that's what carrying the fire means for me. Like grit when you could give up, but there's that glimmer of hope.
Yeah, I really like that. I think there's also like, we can talk about the like what is the fire and then
Yeah,
what does carrying it look like. And I think that answer can vary depending on I guess your outlook on life, on the world. Like we can I
totally.
think we're gonna talk about it next, but like the themes of it's also kind of in dialogue with the carry the fire thing, but Is the road presenting a nihilist worldview? Is it
Right,
trying
right.
to present a Christian worldview or something in between? But then there is such a thing as a death of the author, which kind of says that, well, the author wrote what he wrote, and you know, you can take from it what you think should be taken from it in terms of like what the objective novel is saying, not what McCarthy per se is was trying to say, but what he actually said. And I think that as Christians, I think that Carry the Fire is an incredible metaphor. Like you
Yeah,
said, it's the world is incredibly bleak at times, and the road is in a context of the bleakest of the bleak of times, and still, despite that, trying to preserve morality, humaneness, virtue, trying to preserve the best qualities of humanity that I mean, as Christians we believe can be found ultimately in Christ, and we ought to imitate. And that ultimately it is about hope and not giving up. Like I said, with kind of the metaphor of them trying to reach the ocean or the coast, trying to preserve the fire unto the end of finding something else, finding other people to carry the fire with, finding hope too. Carry the fire. It's like it's kind of what we were talking about earlier with this writing. It's like so simple, and yet so deep and weighty at the same
right,
time.
right.
It's
It's
like
really
saying "carry the fire" is pretty simple. It's obvious what it means, and at least on a superficial level. But then it's got like this weight behind it that uh, I don't know. Mark McCarthy's just really good at like picking words and phrases that communicate that very well. So
totally. I it's like a after reading the book, I think you can like use it as like a battle cry in a sense where it's like we got this. We're carrying the fire.
that's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
it's
Yeah.
pretty awesome.
So I mentioned earlier, but kind of in reaction to this is the presentation of these times where nihilism, which is just to be defined as like a worldview saying that nothing matters, basically in the end. Um, it's kind of those themes, or at least that idea is presented, not maybe endorsed per se. We can talk about it, but also just discussed in the novel. Like, would you say though, like, where would you say the road, the story, the characters, where do you say they land when it comes to this like discussion between nihilism and hope and God and things like that?
Yeah. I don't think the road is nihilist. And I think especially the ending where well we'll probably get to that, but
Yeah, we can. Now's probably a good time just to say, we've kind of avoided major spoilers.
yes,
But
yeah.
if you haven't read the book, we'll probably get into some spoilers soon. So feel free to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Okay. Well then I'll talk about the ending then. Spoiler, the father gets really sick and he dies, and then 3 days after that, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if there's
Mm,
imagery there.
it probably is. Has to be.
Um, the son basically finds this man. Well, this man finds the son who's at the father's body and basically invites him to his house with his kids and wife. And it's just this moment of like completely undeserved grace and it's just really powerful. And I don't like, I think he could have ended it with both the father and the son like dying, and he didn't.
Yeah,
And I think until the last scene, the only people who aren't cannibals, like trying to kill them or like steal food from them,
yeah,
is this man who gives him a home. So I think that's a big point to why it's not nihilism. I think more subtly, the conversation with Ellie, which we've
yeah,
got written down here, also shows that it's not nihilist because really interesting. Ellie tells the father, "There's no God and we are His prophets," which
yeah,
is a big like atheist nihilist like creed line. And the father essentially tells him like, then how did you get here? How did you like get food? And how did like why did my son give you food? And I think he pretty subtly says like his son has a conscience.
hmm
um Maybe that's more nuanced, but I think the son as a character also is almost representative of like a Christian. But maybe that's a side hole. But I don't, in short, I don't think it's nihilistic. Yeah,
yeah.
what do you think, Cooper?
No, totally. I think you're right. I don't think that McCarthy is a Christian, and I don't think that
Right. He's
we can
not.
just say that the road is, presenting a Christian worldview per se. Although I
Right.
think you're totally right. It's not nihilist. It's actually I am with you. I thought it was pronounced Ellie, and I'm wondering now if it's pronounced Eli,
Oh.
because some people think that he's like an Elijah type.
Oh.
There's a clue. It's like when he says something like, um, I knew this was coming, and then he talks about like being the last man alive, which is kind of parallel to Elijah telling God that he was the last faithful member of Israel left, and then God saying,
Oh,
"No, I've
that's
reserved a
right.
remnant." And so it's kind of like this inverse Elijah where he loses faith and becomes this man. Um, and there's also so many like Job themes too. And this is not like I did research for this. I can't claim this myself. Like obviously there is a line you're paying attention. I think at one point the father considers saying, curse God and die, or that's a line of internal dialogue that he has. And the wife exists, a character that exists. Ashes are a common theme. It's
Yeah.
like these ideas are present. And I think that the conversation with Eli, you're right. Where I love it in the beginning where the father says, "If he's not the word of God, then God never spoke." Right? Where it's like the
Yes.
son represents this idea of there is still goodness, like you mentioned, the conscience. There is still a person who is adamant against not eating other humans, against helping those who can't help themselves, that kind of thing. And so that kind of goes back to Carry the Fire, where it's like having faith too, on some level, having faith that being good is has a purpose. As Christians would say that being good is, you know, good because we're living in alignment with God's will. But at the end of the day, I think also the conversation he has with his wife, where she basically gives up and he
Yes.
can't give up, and he can't really explain why. But I really feel like the story is just him working out why, him, this living every day with his son, and then him telling his son like, I thought that I could, I thought that I could watch you die, but I couldn't, And I don't know, like, and then like you said, there are times where all seems lost, and then Providence, benefits them in ways that make no sense, right? Like you mentioned, the very end is a key example. The kid waits 3 days, and then lo and behold, one of the good guys, people carrying the fire, shows up and welcomes the son in. I think of the other big example is where they're starving. They just been in that encounter with the bad guys who have like a house of just um, people that they're waiting to eat, and then they run
Yeah.
into the cellar that's just full of food they could live on forever. They could pack, right? It seems like every time they're at their most desperate, they find some place to recuperate, to eat, and that kind of thing. And I can't remember where it is, but there's some discussion of providence that the father has internally. Each day is its own providence or something like that. But at the end of the day, it is clear that providence is helping them, that providence is guiding them. And so I think that discussion of just the character of the child, the ending, all of that contributes to it being not nihilist. I think that people who like to quote that there is no God and we are his prophets need to like realize who is saying that in the context as well of, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes, I
And
100% agree. Great points.
I have this quote here that I found where it seems like this is Cormac McCarthy kind of wrestling with it though, where it's kind of like this idea of rituals and ceremonies kind of imposing order on chaos, where father says he is washing the son's hair after having to shoot somebody who was trying to get after the son, and he says all of this like some ancient anointing, so be it, evoke the forms where you've nothing else, construct ceremonies out of the air, breathe upon them. And so it's almost like he's the language of like form is drawn upon several times, but he's trying to impose the order of ritual upon chaos, which is can be a nihilist way of looking at the world, like you have to make your own meaning, or it can be a in the face of at least in McCarthy's own wrestling. I don't know if there is anything out there. I don't know if there's any ultimate purpose, but I'm going to do these things anyway. I don't know. I respect McCarthy because he's clearly wrestling.
Right.
I don't think he ends up in an entirely Christian place, but I don't think he ends up in a nihilist place either. And I think there's a lot of evidence, at least in this book, otherwise. So I don't know if want to say anything to what I just said. I talked a while. Sorry, I
Yeah,
yapped.
no, no. I love what you said. I agree. He's definitely not Christian. And though I do think like it's not nihilist and there are a ton of yeah, so many interesting things you brought up, like Ellie relating to Elijah, but just a ton of ways as Christians we can like use this story, I think.
Yeah. How would you say that? Like with the metaphor of like carrying the fire, or
I think yeah, carrying the fire and then the the beauty and goodness that he talks
yeah,
about that's been lost and like the child's conscience. I think all those are like ways where Christians can point to can point to like another world because we need beauty and I think the world's kind of starving of it.
but you have a couple quotes you pulled up here. Go ahead and share those.
Yeah, let me find them. Oh yes. Yeah, the father's watching his son sleep, and the quote goes, "There were times when he, the father, sat watching the boy sleep that he would begin to sob uncontrollably, but it wasn't about death. He wasn't sure that it was what it was about, but he thought it was about beauty or goodness, things that he'd no longer any way to think about at all."
Hmm.
So the father's just weeping because he can't think about beauty and goodness. I just thought that was powerful. And then another instance, he just talks about like the world that was. This is more like just because the world was destroyed, but he kind of goes on, talks about like quoting where once there were brook trout in the streams in the mountains. And then he talks about like an amber currents and the smell of moss in your hand, which is so like not materialistic. Yeah, what do you think about that beauty and goodness?
I think you're absolutely right. I think that the last quote there, it's the final quote in the whole book. I think that's obviously very important. The final
Oh,
paragraph.
really? I didn't remember that.
Yeah, it's the last one. Um,
Wait, that's so
and
awesome.
well, and it's weird is that I too heard someone quote this outside of not in connection to the entire story of the book, and then I read the book. I was like, that's the last paragraph. That's crazy. And I think you're absolutely right. Like it's all tied up in there was something that was lost, and the question of the book is, can that ever be? Can any of that be preserved? And Elijah is saying, I was the last one. God didn't preserve a remnant. God is dead. Um, and the other alternate worldview is no, carry the fire. There is a new kind of beauty, a kind of conscience in the boy that was representing per se that is preserved, and that this thing can't be put back again. Maybe something else can. Maybe something is preserved. But yeah, I think you're right. I think you're especially right about your point that we need beauty, and people like to quote that Dostoevsky. Is it Dostoevsky or yeah, Dostoevsky said beauty will save the world, right? Was it
Maybe
him or was it?
Solskin.
Yes, you're
So,
right. You're right. That was the other person I had. Solzhenitsyn, one of the two. It was a Russian.
yeah.
He said, that sounds even more studious, like a Russian one. Yeah, the Russian said, um, uh, and I think McCarthy's right. Like, well, in this way, he's saying, it's not so much beauty will save the world, but a loss of beauty killed the world. The
Yeah.
kind of inverse of that. So yeah, I think that's so true.
I think it's a perfect picture of what the loss of beauty does to a world. And
Yeah,
it's not a good picture.
yeah, and I this year, I guess, tie it back to our experience at college. We
Yeah.
There was some discussion about we learned about the transcendentals, goodness, truth, and beauty, and how a lot of people see beauty as kind of this impetus or force driving you to goodness and truth. And so, if you when you have beauty, you have the desire, the force to push you to virtue, to push you to the ultimate truth, to push you towards to Christ and to things that are worth living for. And so, if beauty is lost, it means that this I don't know, this driving power is lost, this force is lost. So I really I love honestly the most beautiful quotes to me in the book are probably talking about that.
Yeah. Beauty is, like you said, one of the um like greatest ways to like draw our minds to God. And I'm just grateful we live in a world with beauty. Um, and I think it's really helpful to like read books like The Road where the world is not beautiful and just to like think about what that'd be like. But yeah.
So last night my dad was like, I haven't seen Barbie and and I want to see it. So last night we watched the Barbie movie again. And
What'd you
at the
think?
very oh well I'd seen it already. And I don't know. I mean
Oh, okay.
it's it's kind of funny. It's whatever. It's obviously grossly feminist and whatever. But like
Yeah.
um there was at the very end, Barbie experiences like this vision given to her by. Have you seen it? Have you
No,
seen
I
it? Okay,
haven't.
okay. So the main character Barbie experiences like this vision given to her by the creator of Barbie's ghost or something. It's weird. And it's like one of those like montages of life, where you just see a bunch of clips of people living,
Okay,
and
yeah.
at the end, Barbie decides that she wants that. Okay, it speaks to me that in the whole movie you see the real world being, from Barbie's perspective, misogynistic, gross, disgusting, that kind of thing, and she still chooses, I want to live like that. And it's because of the beauty that she sees in all these things, where she's like, I want that. And I think that this speaks to it too. It's like, how in the midst of the world the road presents, do people want to keep living? And it's because of the beauty represented by the boy that people want to keep living. It's the beauty, and that's how it connects to Barbie. So yeah, um, but anyway,
I love that. Way to great connection.
That's right.
Um,
Redeeming what could not be redeemed. That was some pagan gold right there. I had to melt down Egyptian gold.
no, but that's yeah, beauty will save the world. Like, yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to say about like the themes? Any other thing you picked up on? You want to talk about? Any quotes?
There was the theme of good guys and bad guys,
Yeah.
which was pretty interesting. It pretty directly relates to the carrying the fire.
Hmm.
So, the father tells the son, like, we're the good guys, we're carrying the fire, and but the son's kind of like, who are the good guys?
Right.
At one point he asks his dad, quote, "Are we still the good guys?" And the father says, quote, "The bad guys are the ones who hurt people and take what they want." And then later, he's like, he says, quote, "You wanted to know what the bad guys look like. Now you know. It may happen again. My job is to take care of you. I was appointed to do that by God." That was an interesting line. And then
Yeah.
he continues, "I will kill anyone who touches you. Do you understand that?" The son says, "Yes." I think this is one of the ways, like, oh, I'm hesitant to say like as Christians we're like the good guys and like unbelievers are like the bad guys.
Yeah.
But I think like I don't think that kind of dichotomous thinking is always good. But I think there is that aspect in life of we are going to protect like the people we love.
Hmm.
I think the father's protection of the son is really powerful. But
Yeah.
yeah, good guys, bad guys, and carrying the fire.
Yeah. This
Yeah,
the
what do
quote
you
you had
think of
down.
that?
Yeah, this quote you have down here. Keep a little fire burning, however small, however hidden. It kind of reminds me of Lord of the Rings almost. The secret fire, um, things like that. I don't know. I don't know enough about Tolkien to know like the ins and outs of what the secret fire means even, but um,
Wait, I like
it
that
sounds like that.
connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I was appointed to do that by God is interesting too. But
Yes.
yeah, like you're right. Like you said, with the like who is a good guy, who's a bad guy. I think a lot of the book is about is the father a good guy or bad guy, like and does what he does what he
That's
does
so
what the
true.
father does. What how can why can't I say this? Okay,
No, I know
is
what
what the
you mean.
father does sometimes is that in alignment with the goodness basically. So and I think that's interesting, and I think you're right. Like, it's not dichotomous, but it can sometimes be that way when it
Yeah.
comes to good guys and bad guys. So, all right. There was one other image that I didn't do a lot of research into, but that it came up a couple times. This idea of like the Grail and the chalice, and apparently he was originally going to title this book "The Grail" beforehand, before he changed it to the Road. And so
Oh,
I don't know.
interesting.
There's something there, and I want to maybe research more into that, but having to do with the Arthurian quest to get the Holy Grail, um, this idea of chasing after something pure, um, and at one point there was this quote. I don't know if I have it somewhere. Um, but he compares the boy to like a chalice, and so that connotates the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, um, the Holy Grail, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. There's something there to be dived into deeper for sure. But I thought that was interesting too. Wanted to note that.
I didn't know that he's gonna have that as a name.
Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah, it kind of changes the way you think about it.
For sure.
All right. Well, any concluding thoughts? What would you say to someone who maybe has heard maybe a few things about McCarthy, but is kind of
Yes.
off put by maybe the reputation he has, or
Mhm.
maybe he's read a few pages of the road and is like, I don't know if this is for me. Like, what would you say to someone to convince them to read it?
Yes. The road is not for everyone, obviously. It's like a really deep book, but I think if you can handle like there's a lot of really intense scenes, but I think
Yeah,
it is like it delivers, especially with the ending. There's like a payoff. But I think it's just a very like deep picture of like a world without beauty
yeah,
and a father and son carrying the fire in that. Um, I think it's also like a one of a kind book, like with stuff like we said with
hmm
um like the unnamed protagonists and the the punctuation. But I think yeah, if you can deal with the depth, then I think
yeah,
I highly recommend it. Yeah.
yeah,
Would
yeah.
you say?
No, totally. I think I'd echo all that. I don't know if I'd add anything. I think it's great.
Okay.
One thing I noticed is at the very end, though, the boy, when after the father dies, he says the father's name over and over again, but then we're not told what that was. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that, but
Hmm.
I thought that was interesting.
That is really interesting.
Yeah. I don't know if that has anything to do with like drawing upon like the names of things and the power, like, it's kind of a trope in fantasy too, where if you can name something that's a power
Oh,
over
that's
kind of thing.
true.
Um, I don't know. Or if he just is another instance of him not wanting to reveal the specific names of something for the sake of being archetypal. So
Yeah. Wait.
there's so much of that where it's just like he sprinkles it in. And you're like, I don't know. I guess I just have to keep reading now. Or I have
Yeah.
to, yeah. So
But also how like Ellie's named and he's like a
right,
minor character.
right,
I don't know. Yeah,
sure,
there's stuff there.
yeah. Okay, well, real quick, let's do some donor shout outs. So I'm just gonna say their name, and you can just shout them out, give them an exclamation. Okay,
Sweet. Absolutely.
unique. Here we go. All right. Well, thank you to our patrons, Nana,
Thanks, Nana. Woo.
Van Pappy, and Wayla.
Man, Pappy and Wayla. Thank you.
Anna,
Thanks, Anna.
Keenan,
Thanks a bunch, Keenan.
Will,
Will, much
my mom,
appreciated. Thank you, Cooper's mom.
Mrs. Hall,
Thanks, Mrs. Hall.
and Kara.
Thank you so much, Kara.
Thanks to all who support us over at patreon.com/booknet. And thanks to all who leave a 5-star rating and review. And thank you so much to Isaiah, our very special guest today. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Cooper.
Anytime you want, talk about a
Thank
book.
you
Please
so
let me know.
much.
I really enjoyed
Yeah,
the
I've
conversation.
really enjoyed talking about a book I really enjoy. And hope people read it and think about it.
All right. Well, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. Until then,
Keep on booking it.
love it.